you realize it's Dylan?
It's his deal.
Well, good morning. Is this on? Does it sound
No.
like it is on? Yeah. Is it on?
Now it
It's
is.
on now. Look at that. Okay. We are technologically challenged. So, it's good to have you guys here. We're going to get back at it here on some of the lessons that I have learned through the 20 months of COVID. And kind of like we did last week, it is acceptable to give your input if you wish. I'll try to ask questions. If you don't talk loud enough, I may restate what you just said so that everybody can hear. I don't know if I just have old age hearing problems or if in fact you're not talking loud enough, but we'll see how that is. Now here's what's interesting. Last week this is my opinion. Okay, you may not have had the same experience, but in my opinion, I would ask questions and we would get good input from people, but we stepped out close to the edge on giving opinions that were not necessarily agreed with by other people in the room. And so I appreciate that nobody ran at somebody and barrel rolled them because you disagreed with what they said. That way, your restraint was really good. And trust me, there was nothing that I said last week that was, in my opinion, even remotely controversial. From my point, I was sort of just teeing the ball up a little bit by asking certain questions and letting you give your response in terms of lessons that you may have learned and so forth. We'll continue to do that, but I want you to, as you talk, if you have an opinion on something, make sure that you are clear and succinct. And if somebody else gives their insight or their opinion, then listen carefully to what they have to say and weigh it out. And that's part of the good discourse habits. But I realize when I start and I say, here's a lesson that I've learned, you may not have learned that same lesson. It may be, you may have learned the exact opposite. And because I'm not up here, at least in this hour, teaching the Bible, this will be kind of a free flow of ideas. And if you have a different one, that's fine, all right? But I would like you to hear out mine, at least. Because I've spent some time thinking about them, and I'm not going to just be off the cuff. So here's a lesson that I learned, and these, again, they're kind of random. And I relearned a lesson that we are really quick, I think, to forget. And that is the past 20 months have reminded me in really, really vivid ways that we are not in control of our lives. Now, there are a lot of angry people in our world these days who are just as angry as can be because they are not in control. You know, that somebody's in charge of their life, somebody's making them do this, and somebody, all that kind of stuff. We know that. We are not in control. We can control a little bit every now and then, and we should work to control our world as best we can. But we are not. We are not in control. There are things that, and we all have those same experiences where we think we have the world by the tail. We think we have everything lined up and going in the right direction, right? And then we get sick in a way that we weren't prepared for. You get sick and something happens and you go, oh, wait a minute. This is messing up my life. This was not part of my plan. We who are parents, and now even grandparents, we just kind of tiptoe through situations, sometimes going, please, 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 will this be okay? And it was a good reminder that people who claim to live by faith need to step up and live by faith. And this was the last 20 months was a great reminder to me of, I stood up years ago and said, I am going to live by faith. I am not going to live by sight. Because I thought that was what followers of Jesus did. And it seems like every day is a challenge to that. The last 20 months has been a challenge on steroids of living. So I'm going to ask you a question. Speak loudly. How have you been reminded over the last 20 months in direct relationship to the whole COVID experience? How have you been reminded that you are a person who lives by faith and not by sight? Have you had any vivid experience in the year that is noteworthy, where you go, yep, this was mine? We can take a minute or two and do that. Oh dear.
Losing a job.
Say what?
Losing a job.
Losing a job in the 20 months, as if you needed that on top of everything else. What else? Yeah, health challenges.
Moving houses.
Okay. No, and it could be that I was just overly sensitive to that. I don't know. That's where, when we have dialogue, that's my story. It may not have been your story. You may have rocked along the last 20 months, and it was just like the previous 20 months for you.
No, it's horrible.
Thank you, David.
Moving from California to Texas was a conclusion that we came to while we were locked up.
Yeah.
We needed to make a move. Wasn't quite sure what the right thing to do, but during the last 2 years it became very clear. I gotta go.
Yeah. It was a huge step of faith for you guys to do what you did. And I don't know if you guys know much about David and Gigi's story, but there's a whole lot of sight unseen stuff going on to make a move back here to Texas after having been gone for some years. Yeah, start over, certainly. Kind of connected to the being reminded that we are not in control is that problems that we go through often feel much bigger and much more complicated when we are going through a crisis that is out of our control. So normal day-to-day things became, for many people, bigger. I would have been able to handle this better, but I'm going through this big catastrophe, and so even the little things became more difficult to handle.
Kind of like the snowstorm in the midst of Shannon.
Yeah, oh, okay. We tried to forget that. Kind of like the wonderful Texas snowstorm in the midst of that. I was walking through my house, and there are some things on the inside of my house that are different now, and that during the snowstorm it was kind of undone. We were in the middle of a project, and then it just sat there with a big hole in the wall when the storm hit. And the best we could do was put up a sheet of plywood over the huge hole in our living room, and wait it out as we watched the snow drifts blowing through the side of the plywood. Yeah, that seemed like a much bigger problem at the time. Probably would have been okay. I think that the problems like businesses closing or political division, which we've always had with us. Boy, the 20 months, that it ramped that up. Problems that we would face or did face in our marriages or in our family units, maybe extended family units, under normal circumstances might not have felt so great, but because of going through this huge thing, these things became horrible. I just think about church, church having to close down. Yeah, we can weather a little bit, but in this big, massive 20-month upheaval, closing church down and doing things differently became, sometimes it was overwhelming. And we have talked about that. And so the partner lesson for this one to me was how necessary strong, deep roots in our spiritual life are to be able to withstand what we go through. It's fascinating to me, and I guess we are all part of this to some degree, and that is, when you start to go through a crisis in your life, pick your crisis, I don't care what it is. You start to go through a crisis, and then you say, man, I need to get right with God. I need to get my prayer life going. I need to dust off my Bible and start reading it. This is really hard what I'm going through. I want to find out what God has to say. I need to read something that's going to be comforting to my heart and comforting to my soul. And we get sort of busy trying to square things away in our spiritual life. When the truth of the matter is, if we would have been doing that all along, the thing that we are going through might look entirely different. That's the whole concept of having deep roots. I was taught when I was really young, both Wanda and I were taught this as as just a way to live our lives in how we follow Jesus, and that is, when it comes to the Bible, there's a difference between offensive and defensive study. When it comes to prayer, there's a difference between offensive and defensive prayer. Defensive prayer or defensive Bible study is when you're back on your heels and you're trying to dig in to hold off the enemy. I always pictured it as, you know, if you take another one of my sports analogies, you know, the other team is rolling down the field in football, and they're just pounding and pounding, and they're getting closer to the end zone to score. And if they score, the game is over. And so they get within about the 3 or 4 yard line. And what the defensive team, they send in like 4 behemoths. You know, they run on the field and replace the smaller guys, and they call timeout, and they come up with a strategy. How are we going to stop the other team from getting in the end zone? There's this almost a panic to stop what's going on. That's defense. Often our prayer life and our Bible study is like that. It's like most of our life is sometimes spent at the 50-yard line or even on the other team's side, and life is going pretty good, and we forget. We don't pray with the same urgency. We don't study with the same urgency. Instead, what we need to be doing is taking a more offensive approach when things are going well, and building up the reserve and getting stronger, because you know the storm is coming. Okay? And if I could junk all of the other things that I have down here, all of the other lessons, and just have you remember the one thing that I say today. You have not gone through the worst pandemic or the worst thing in your life yet. More than likely. Now, maybe some of you have, but the likelihood of you having something else out there that is going to demand every single spiritual reserve that you have just to stand up to it, it's still lurking out there. Yeah, I'm not saying that to be a negative Nancy. I'm just saying that's the way life is. So have you learned your lesson? Are you now, things are good. They're a lot better now, right? And we're not being pounded by COVID. We're not being, you know, maybe you're going through bad things, but it's not like it was. Are you taking advantage of the time to get ready for the next one? I don't know. Nobody can do that one for you. You know, I am notorious for, and some of you are really good at this, and you really bother me, okay? And that is when the weather is good, you are out there working on your house to get it ready for when the bad stuff comes. You're fixing things, you're tightening things down, you're replacing things. You know how we do? You know what I do after the storm? I sit in my recliner and enjoy the fact that I'm not out there scrambling. You know, instead of running out there and fixing everything. I still haven't learned that lesson. What you do with your spiritual life is infinitely more important than your house, because the storm is coming. Don't know what it's going to look like. It may not be national. It may just be your own private storm that you have to go through. But it will be there. So take care of yourself. Any comments about that? Okay. You guys sense that this is being recorded, and you just got really quiet this weekend. John.
I'll say something. I'm finding with losing not one or two people, one to COVID, one to the ice monitors, that I am not taking my precious for granted. I think with COVID, it was a wake-up call that just not very relaxed. Okay, because you're friends in church, just like next week or last week.
no, it's connected. I think I'm going to say something like that a little later on. But yeah, not taking our friendships for granted and not investing in them. It's real easy to just be super aloof or not heavily invested in friendships when things are going well. And this was a huge wake-up call for them, John. No doubt about that. Okay, here's another lesson. I think that there was a lot of conversation over the past couple of years that connected to this statement that says we need to get back to normal. Remember how we heard that a lot? Just want things to get back to normal. And over 20 months, whether we liked it or not, most of us developed a lot of new normal for our personal lives and have no intention of going back. And your new normal may be in absolute conflict with my new normal. I don't like your new normal, maybe. And you say, so I'll just go back to my house and shut the door. Like you got used to. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. But we wanted to go back, and especially in church life. We were not the only church that kind of moped around during these months going, I just want to get back to normal church life, where people are, our building's full, and we're with each other. I want to go back to hugging. I want to go back to this and that. And it's really funny. Have you noticed this? There are some people that used to hug that are never going to hug again. Never. Okay? I have this tendency still that the fist bump has sort of replaced the handshake for lots of people. So you offer the fist bump, and then if somebody offers their hand, then you're in crisis. Right? Should I do this? Okay, and then you grab the top of their fist, and that just messes everything up. No, but we all know that, we did this dance and have done this dance with normal for a couple of years, but my take on it is just a little bit different, and that is that we developed a new normal, I think, over the course of 2 years. And a lot of the new normal is really good. There are a lot of things that we learned over 2 years that we would be foolish if we went back to the way that we used to do it, whether it's our own personal lives, or our marriages, or even church life. But here's the deal. I think we are slowly going back to the old normal in a lot of things. Here. Oh, yeah. Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. If we keep it in the kind of the church world of this, now you all have your own in your own personal lives, but in the church world, there were some stretches during the last 20 months where we got hyper defensive with our spiritual life and even turned more offensive, and started doing some things, and then it just sort of slowed down. And that's the concept of slowly going back to the old ways. From a church life point of view, I said this last week, and I believe it statistically, is that COVID did not create a decline in church attendance. There was already a slow 30-year decline in church attendance and even church influence in society. We who are a little older, it doesn't take much for somebody to come up and poke us, and we go, well, back in the old days, church used to be like this, and we speak about it or talk about it as if we had lived through the golden age of kingdom issues. I don't necessarily believe that, but I think there were a lot of things that were really different 20, 30, 40 years ago in church life. The decline started about 40 years ago. There are sociological benchmarks of things that happened in our society that have a direct effect on how church life unfolded during those years and what we are left with now. COVID didn't start the decline. There was a decline in attendance for about, here, even just at North Point, there was a decline in our attendance for the last 10 years. That is true. And so, my question would be, and it's kind of rhetorical, but I would like you to think about it, is if we have been in, as most churches have been, in a slow decline in church attendance. Now that doesn't discount the fact that there are a number of mega churches around that have benefited by people leaving their smaller churches. That is non-debatable anymore, that happens. But if we were in a slow, not entirely noticeable decline, but certainly if we look back at it for 10 years, why would we ever want to go back to the things that we were doing during that 10-year decline? That's just a logical thing. Why would we do that? Why would we not take advantage of the fact that we got, there was a phrase that was used in the larger church world, looking at the positive side of COVID, is it was a chance for churches to reboot. Okay, any of you that work with computers, you know the concept of rebooting. It's like, you get to hard start all over again. We in our house, it's like when the computer takes over our house, it stops working and we start to get frustrated and panic. You know how that is in your home when it's not working right? It's amazing to me that it takes 12 tries at fixing it before we go, oh, wait. Why don't we just turn it all off and start it over again? You know that one? And you turn it off and it reboots and it's like everything goes back to normal.
That's not what you do. You call me.
And that's why you have to have a friend like Brandon. You call him up. And then you know what Brandon says to me? Have you rebooted? John.
A lot of times with Wi-Fi, you just leave it alone. Just restart it and leave it alone.
Yeah.
In a couple of hours, it'll automatically reboot. But I think we get mad, frustrated, impatient. I'd rather just go have coffee, come back home, everything's fine. Okay.
Yeah, the problem is when we use that idea, John, the plumbing doesn't fix itself.
No, not plumbing. No.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Just Wi-Fi. No,
And
plumbing does not fix itself.
relationships don't work that way either. Yeah.
Where churches were in decline, why would we want to go back to that same state creating churches in decline? I mean, a reboot says do something different.
Yes.
Now, I do the same old thing and hope it.
Yes. And that's where the reboot analogy comes just short. The reboot part is we had a chance to stop doing, and we did. We stopped doing almost everything. But we're creatures of habit, and I think our nature is to slowly drift back to what we've always done.
But not everything was a failure either.
No, it wasn't. But it should have given us the opportunity to evaluate everything that we were doing and pick and choose what we would pick back up on. Yes?
All of this exposes the fallacy that there is a law.
Yes.
Because there is no law. We could go back to that same exact point in time. There's absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that we still end up in the same place. We could end up in a completely 180-degree different place with one little attempt might work out differently. We are such creatures of habit, and we are so, things are comfortable, and we like to be in that comfort. But in fact, there really is no normal. There's never been a normal. There's never at any point in history been a time when it hasn't been changing. And we just need to adapt to the change better than we, and that's not a we, that's everybody everywhere on an ongoing basis. We just need to adapt to change better and forget expecting things to stay, even when they're good.
Well, and all three of my first lessons are kind of tied together. We're not in control. Why do we think we're in control? You know, we have to be people that learn to adapt, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yes. Well, and that's, you know, I alluded to that in the marriage class. Here are lessons that I've learned and habits that have been built into our lives, and those don't change with the wind. So there are some things that are immovable, but nothing should be immovable in essence, because there may be something better that comes along that would help us adapt even better than that. Yeah, we would never stop studying the Bible, but we can certainly learn to study it more effectively. Instead of just going, well, this is the way, you know. It's kind of like the statement, you know, when I talk to somebody, they go, well, I only read this version of the Bible. And I want to say to them, you need to stop and open up. There are way more possibilities. Okay, and it's kind of like that. Let me tell you, COVID, here were some unexpected gifts for me that I would say they were probably true for you, and we've touched on them already. It made us stop, and it made us stop doing some things that were probably not healthy for us. It just forced a stop. Now, you may have picked up those unhealthy habits, you know, as soon as you got out in public, but it did force a stop. It forced evaluation. Money became tighter. Time was wide open, but it was a different kind of time. As I look back on it, I think I was busier during COVID than I was before, and that's a bad habit that I have continued on with, is that I still am busy in ways that I wasn't before COVID. I don't get that, but it did cause us to evaluate. It let us stop doing things that were getting us nowhere. From a church point of view, it forced creativity. Because we couldn't do things the way we always had done them, it was like, well, how do we get them done anyway? And so there was this real creative juice that flowed around here. And to continue to be creative now is harder work. It is really harder. to do it. That may be true for you at work. It may be true for you at home. I don't know. COVID certainly opened our eyes to new possibilities of what we could be as a church, or what you could be as a representative of Jesus in the world. All these new possibilities in relationships and ministry, and how to use your own personal resources and so forth. COVID played a role in that, and I thought it was pretty cool. I think a real positive thing that came out of this for me as a leader here at North Point, and that is that I think we learned that we could still do church well with fewer things going on. Church has this tendency to evaluate its worth by how many things are on the calendar at any point in time. Kind of like, look at how busy we are. Well, we couldn't be as busy as a church. And there were lots of people that said to me during the 2 years, hey, I'm so glad we slowed down on some things. It's given me more time to be with my family. It's given me more time to be with my neighbors. It's given me just more time for myself, because there wasn't this, continual calendar pounding away at us. Now, here's the flip side of that, is that we are gravitating back to our old way of doing things. Here, I'm not even going to touch that. The thought of you sitting at home watching your TV and eating Cheerios all day that's a scary thought to me. I hope we don't forget that lesson, that we are not defined by how long our list is of things that we are busy doing. That shouldn't be true for us as individuals, and it shouldn't be true for us as a church. I think the lesson out of the past couple of years is, let's make sure we're investing in the things that have the best payback, that have the best possibility of making an impact in the world, or on the lives of the people that come through our doors, or that we meet online. Rather than just doing things to do them and to be busy. We don't want to do that. Hope we don't forget that lesson. Would you say, you can measure your response, but I'm curious, and just in this room, do you feel like after 2 years of COVID, is your family life more or less complicated? Have any of you thought about it enough to be able to evaluate it and say it? About the same? Same? Do you need counseling?
Usually.
Everything in life is changing, and in 2 years, if it's not, it's going to change.
Yeah, but for you, it's not directly related to COVID. It's just that spot in life.
COVID just one more stumbling away.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment about that family life?
I felt like it was really big for us, or for me. Mary working from home, which made it accessible to Harrison, which freed my time up at work.
Okay.
In that sense, for me, it was a good thing.
How many of you started, or not maybe started, but that working from home during COVID became your normal routine, starting in COVID? You that raised your hand, how many of you are still working from home? Part-time now. Okay. For you that are working from home now, due to COVID, still at home, is that better or worse for you as a person and in your family life?
It depends. I've been a work from homer for 10 plus years, and I didn't like having people in my house because that's my office. And so for me, that was a big change, but this is too.
I think it's better for me as a person than as an employee, but it's worse for my relationship with my daughter. Because there's a new ongoing conflict about whether or not I'm really working or I'm just ignoring her. So there's a constant vie for my attention that didn't used to be there, that has continued these 20 months and will forever continue, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it was harder for me personally because I feel like I don't. When I was in the office, I would get up and I would move and I would do things, and when I'm at home, like, I just sit there more and I don't move around as much, and I feel like I don't ever get away from the mom duties. Like, I have a minute and I'll go start a load of laundry, or I catch myself like being more stressed with those things because I'm constantly doing it, and there's no barriers now between like work and home and responsibilities.
Yeah.
One of the things that we working from home is lack of socialization. Because at work you do see people, you may not sit in their space all day, but you see them and you engage and you have different relationships. And during COVID, you were at home and then you couldn't go anywhere, or you were very limited because we're shut down. So I think we had to be more intentional about widening our.
Yes. Yeah.
I learned that I used to think I was extroverted, that nobody taught me that I'm really an introvert that is supposed to be extroverted. And that's mostly for just working from home, but, yeah, I found one of the true realizations about yourself, I found out that I'm really introverted, and it's just to be extroverted.
I think one of the things I found is that there are way more introverts in the world than extroverts. And even the extroverts we have are closet introverts. And COVID gave you permission to do that. That's pretty funny. Yeah, it's it is just kind of the how we have to adapt. I found that I had a lot of conversations during the past couple of years. This was with men primarily. I had a few of these with women, but mostly with men who were forced to work from home and couldn't wait to get back to the office. It's like, they were like caged animals. They couldn't wait to get back there, and that was part of that was because they missed their routine, and they struggled to find a regular routine at home and that worked for them, and they never did, and so they just sort of sat around waiting, for the phone call from work. Oh, you can come back now, and then being jealous of the people that still got to work their jobs, outside the house during COVID. So as Buzzy comes up and gets ready to close us with a couple of choruses, I just want you to know that this is, every single one of these, at least for me, is tied to a greater spiritual good. For me, trying to see, it kind of falls into the category of going through things and then saying, God, is there a lesson in this that I can learn? Is there something that if I would get my ear more in tune with what you are doing in the world, what you are doing in my life, then I could learn something from this rather than being resistant and fighting back. That is our nature. When we get in situations that we don't like, we just fight to try to get them to go back to the way that they were. And sometimes that's an okay thing to do. But it is never okay to try to spend all of our time trying to get things back to a comfort level that we like, and then miss out on the greater good that God could teach us if we were better connected to Him, either through the Word or just through life experience and going through it and saying, God, teach me something. I don't tie that together with God's sovereignty. It will never come out of my mouth that God planned this really catastrophic event so that He could teach me something. My personal theology doesn't go down that road. But it goes down the road that says that God is still teaching and always actively teaching, no matter what we go through. That there is no situation that we experience that God cannot redeem for our good. And that is true for COVID. So I would encourage you to go back and rethink what are some of the lessons you have learned, and be careful that you didn't miss out on what God was teaching. You may have learned a new way to do plumbing at your house. You may have learned a new recipe, to cook, and that's all good. But don't miss out on the greater good, which is that God is actively involved in anything that we happen to be going through. Okay, we're going to sing a couple of choruses, and I'll just remind you, we haven't spent much time saying this, but
what the heck was it?
if you are unable to stay for the 10:15 hour in the little room off the side of the lobby out there, there is set up in that room some chairs and some bags of communion, and you can go in that room